powerful introduction to the 70 divided by 10 divided by 10 divided by 10 formula. Jim Rohn often reminded his audiences with a smile, it's not the amount that counts, it's the plan that counts. Think about that for a moment. Most people believe that the secret to wealth is simply earning more money. If only they had a bigger paycheck, they tell themselves, life would finally be better. But have you ever noticed that even people who double or triple their income often end up in the same financial mess? They make more, they spend more, and the cycle continues. Why? Because the problem is not income. The problem is philosophy. Jim discovered that money without a plan is like water in your hand, it slips away before you even realize it's gone. And that's why he developed a simple, timeless formula for financial freedom. The 70 divided by 10, divided by 10, divided by 10 plan. 70% for living, 10% for savings, 10% for investment, and 10% for giving. 4 numbers, 1 formula, a lifetime of difference. This is not a theory, not a wishful idea, it's a discipline, a philosophy, a way of managing life that turns financial chaos into financial freedom. Let's face it, most people live on 100% of what they earn, and sometimes even more by borrowing and using credit. They think financial freedom comes from having more, but in reality, it comes from controlling what you already have. If you can't manage a dollar, you can't manage a million. That was Jim's lesson. He used to say, financial independence is more a matter of discipline than it is of income. And that's why this formula is so powerful. It forces you to live within your means, to prepare for the future, to grow your wealth, and to build a life of generosity. Imagine this. Every time you receive a paycheck, you immediately divide it according to the formula. 70% goes to your living expenses. That's the roof over your head, the food on your table, the clothes on your back. 10% goes into savings, building a financial cushion that protects you from emergencies and prepares you for opportunities. Another 10% goes into investments, your future wealth, the seeds that will grow and multiply if you tend them wisely. And the last 10%? That's for giving, for charity, for causes and people beyond yourself. This is the part that transforms your wealth into significance. Jim used to say, giving is better than receiving because giving starts the receiving process. That's the formula in action. Balance, discipline, generosity. Now, why do we start here, with money? Because money touches every part of life. It determines how we live, how we work, and even how we dream. If you are constantly stressed about bills, drowning in debt, or chasing every dollar with no plan, then your potential is trapped. But if you have a system, a philosophy for money, suddenly you have freedom, clarity, and the ability to focus on building a life that matters. That's why Jim didn't just teach about wealth, he taught about stewardship. He believed that managing money well was proof you could manage your life well. And here's the good news. You don't have to wait until you're wealthy to start. The formula works no matter how small your income may be. If you earn $10, you can practice it. If you earn 100, 1,000, or 10,000, the principle is the same. What matters is not the amount, but the discipline. By choosing to live on 70%, you create space for growth. By saving 10%, you secure your foundation. By investing 10%, you multiply your future. And by giving 10%, you enrich your soul. 4 simple acts that build not only wealth but character. And character, Jim would say, is the true foundation of success. Think of this formula as a financial compass. Without it, you drift, you react, you struggle. With it, you steer your life toward freedom, security, and significance. It's not just about numbers, it's about philosophy, about proving to yourself that you can be trusted with more because you have learned to master what you have. And once you grasp this, everything changes. The 70 divided by 10 divided by 10 divided by 10 formula is more than money management. It's life management. It's the art of discipline applied to your wallet, your habits, and your heart. Jim Rohn's invitation is clear. Don't wait for the day you finally earn enough. Don't tell yourself you'll start when the raise comes or when the business succeeds. Start now, with what you have, and watch how this simple formula can rewrite your financial story. From scarcity to abundance, from stress to peace, from survival to freedom, it all begins with a plan, a philosophy, a discipline. And that plan is the 70 divided by 10 divided by 10 divided by 10 formula. Jim Rohn's story and the lessons about money picture. A young man in his 20s, working hard every day, putting in the hours, yet never getting ahead. That was Jim Rohn. He wasn't born into wealth. He had no special advantages, and by his own admission, he was broke, in debt, and wondering why life wasn't working out the way he thought it would. He had a family to support, bills to pay, and dreams that seemed to fade with every passing day. He used to joke that when the knock came at the door, he hoped it was a friend, not a collector. He was making money, yes, but the money seemed to slip through his fingers as quickly as it came in. And here is the great lesson he learned early. It's not how much you earn that matters, it's how you manage what you earn. Most people think their problem is income, but the truth is their problem is philosophy. You can hand someone a fortune, and if they have poor philosophy, they will squander it. You can hand someone a modest paycheck, and if they have the right philosophy, they can build wealth. Jim discovered this the hard way, and it nearly cost him everything. Then, one day, his life took a dramatic turn. He met a man named Earl Schoaf, a successful entrepreneur who carried himself with dignity, confidence, and wisdom. Earl asked Jim a simple but piercing question. How much money have you saved over the last 6 years? Embarrassed, Jim admitted that he had nothing to show for it. Schoaf looked him in the eye and said, Here's the truth. It's not the amount that counts, it's the plan that counts. If you don't have a plan for your money, someone else will. That statement shocked Jim. He realized that his poverty wasn't just financial, it was philosophical. His paycheck wasn't the problem, his lack of a plan was. From that day forward, Jim became a student of money, discipline, and personal growth. He began to understand that every dollar has a destination, and if you don't decide its destination, it will disappear. Schoaf introduced him to the concept of dividing his income into categories, some for living, some for saving, some for investing, and some for giving. It was the seed of what would later become Jim's famous 70 divided by 10, divided by 10, divided by 10 formula. At first, the idea felt impossible. How could he save or invest when he was barely making enough to survive? But Earl reminded him, if you can't start with $1, you won't be trusted with $1 million. Discipline starts where you are, not where you wish to be. Jim took that advice to heart. He began small, setting aside a little each time he got paid. It wasn't much, but it was a start, and more importantly, it was a philosophy in action. Slowly but surely, he saw a shift. His savings began to grow, his mindset began to change. He started living within his means instead of beyond them. He discovered the freedom that comes not from earning more, but from controlling what you already have. Jim's story reminds us that wealth is not a sudden windfall, it's the result of consistent habits, guided by a sound philosophy. He used to say, I found out it's not the government that's the problem. It's not my employer, it's not the economy. The problem was me, and if I changed, everything else would change. That was the breakthrough that turned his life around. As Jim practiced these lessons, he transformed from a broke young man into a successful entrepreneur and, eventually, a millionaire. But more important than the money was the character he developed along the way. He learned that financial freedom is a byproduct of personal discipline. You don't just build wealth, you build yourself, and wealth follows. He often compared money to a mirror. It reflects who you are becoming. If you're careless and irresponsible, your finances will show it. If you're disciplined and intentional, your finances will reward you. Money doesn't make you different, it makes you more of who you already are. For Jim, the turning point wasn't a bigger paycheck, it was a bigger philosophy. Earl Schoaf had planted the seed, and Jim nurtured it until it became a guiding principle that shaped the rest of his life. He discovered that wealth is built not in sudden leaps but in daily disciplines. Save a little, invest a little, give a little, and live on the rest. Do it long enough, and the results are inevitable. That is why he often said, success is nothing more than a few simple disciplines practiced every day. Jim's story is not just about money, it's about mastery. Mastery of self, mastery of choices, mastery of philosophy. From a man who once dreaded the sound of the doorbell because he feared another bill collector, he became a man who welcomed opportunity, who gave generously, and who built a fortune not just of money but of wisdom. And the lesson for us is this. If Jim Rohn could make that shift, so can you. Your starting point does not determine your future. What matters is the decision to adopt a new philosophy today. You may not control the economy, but you can control your habits. You may not control your paycheck right now, but you can control how you divide it. And once you take responsibility for your money, you take responsibility for your life. That was Jim Rohn's story, and that is the invitation. To move from financial chaos to financial freedom, not by chance, but by choice, by discipline, by a plan. The 70% for living expenses, Jim Rohn often said, learn to live on less than you earn. That one principle alone can change the trajectory of your financial life. The first part of the 70 divided by 10 divided by 10 divided by 10 formula is simple. Live on 70% of your income. For most people, this is where the struggle begins, because the habit of spending consumes them. They believe that if they make more money, their financial problems will vanish. But in reality, when income goes up, expenses often rise to match it. It's called lifestyle inflation, and it keeps people broke no matter how much they earn. Jim discovered that true financial freedom comes not from income alone but from discipline. If you cannot manage your spending, no amount of money will save you. That's why the 70% rule is so critical. It teaches you to live within your means, to exercise self-control, and to distinguish between needs and wants. The difference between survival and prosperity is often found in how you handle the everyday choices. Do you spend impulsively or do you spend intentionally? Living on 70% forces you to be intentional. It requires you to ask hard questions. Do I really need this? Can I delay this purchase? Am I trying to impress others, or am I building a stable future? Jim would remind his audiences that money is easy to spend but hard to replace, and without discipline, people trade long-term security for short-term satisfaction. He used to tell the story of how, in his early days, he spent freely on small luxuries without realizing the cost. It wasn't the big purchases that kept him broke, it was the constant little ones. Coffee here, a gadget there, dinners out, clothes he didn't need. It added up. And the lesson was clear. The leaks sink the ship. By adopting the 70% rule, you plug the leaks and steer your financial ship toward safety. But this principle is not about deprivation. It's not about denying yourself every pleasure in life. It's about balance. You still enjoy life, you still buy the things you need, but you do it with wisdom and boundaries. 70% is enough to live comfortably if you choose wisely. And here's the beauty. Once you train yourself to live on 70%, even when your income increases, you maintain the discipline. That means more money goes into savings, investment, and giving, while your lifestyle remains steady. This creates margin, and margin creates peace. Jim used to say that most people are broke, not because they don't earn enough, but because they spend too much. He would challenge his listeners. If you're in debt while making $30,000 a year, you'll probably be in debt making $60,000 a year. The numbers change, but the habits remain the same. That's why the formula isn't just about money, it's about habits, philosophy, and self-mastery. Living on 70% also creates a sense of freedom. When you know your bills are covered, when you live below your means, you reduce stress and create space for opportunity. You are no longer enslaved by every paycheck. Instead of being reactive, you become proactive. And when emergencies arise, and they will, you are better prepared because you've built a lifestyle of discipline. Consider the opposite. People who live on 100% or even 110% of their income. They borrow, they finance, they accumulate debt. They spend tomorrow's income today, and when tomorrow comes, they are trapped. That cycle destroys freedom and creates endless anxiety. The 70% rule breaks that cycle. It allows you to live with dignity, to provide for your family, and to enjoy life without sinking into the quicksand of overspending. And here's another truth Jim emphasized. If you can't live on 70%, then you won't live on 100% either. It's not about the number, it's about the principle. The point is not perfection but practice. Start where you are. If you're living on 90% now, aim for 85%, then 80% until you reach 70%. Progress is the goal, not instant mastery. The act of practicing discipline, even in small increments, begins to transform your relationship with money. Living on 70% also teaches gratitude. When you choose to live within limits, you start to appreciate what you already have instead of always chasing more. Gratitude turns what you have into enough, and enough is the foundation for wealth. If you're never content with 70%, you'll never be content with 100% either, because contentment is a mindset, not a number. Jim's wisdom was timeless. Don't let expenses rise to meet income. Let discipline rise to meet opportunity. When you master the 70%, you gain control over your financial destiny. You prove to yourself that you are capable of stewardship, that you can be trusted with more because you've mastered less. And in that mastery lies the secret. Wealth is not built on how much you earn, but on how much you keep and how much you control. The 70% for living expenses is not just a guideline, it's a safeguard, a training ground, and a declaration that you refuse to let money control you. Instead, you control it. And that is the first step toward financial independence. The 10% for investment. Jim Rohn often said, Profits are better than wages. Wages make you a living. Profits make you a fortune. That's the philosophy behind setting aside 10% of your income for investment. Savings will protect you, but investments will grow you. Too many people confuse the two, yet they serve different purposes. Saving is like storing seeds in a jar to keep you alive through the winter. Investment is planting those seeds in the ground so they multiply into a harvest. Without investment, you'll always trade your time for money. With investment, your money begins to work for you. And that's the key to wealth, making money while you sleep. Jim discovered early on that he could not rely on wages alone. He realized that if he wanted freedom, he had to turn a portion of his income into capital, and capital into growth. That's why the 10% investment portion is non-negotiable. It's not something you do when it's convenient. It's something you discipline yourself to do every single time you get paid. Even if it's small, even if it feels insignificant, it matters because the principle matters. The habit matters. The discipline matters. Jim used to say, if you cannot invest 10 cents out of a dollar, you won't invest 10,000 out of 100,000. The amount doesn't determine the habit determines the amount. So where do you invest? Jim was clear. Invest in things you understand, in opportunities that align with your vision, and in ventures that have the potential to grow. That could mean a business, real estate, stocks, or even intellectual property. The form doesn't matter as much as the principle. You must become an investor, not just a consumer. And remember, investments are not just financial. Investing in yourself is often the highest return investment you can make. Courses, skills, books, seminars, these can yield dividends for a lifetime. When Jim set aside 10% for investments, he wasn't just chasing quick profits. He was developing the mindset of ownership. He wanted to own assets, not just expenses. He wanted to plant trees that would bear fruit year after year. Too many people buy liabilities and call them investments. A fancy car that depreciates is not an investment. A vacation is not an investment. True investment produces growth, income, or value over time. That's why the 10% investment rule forces you to think long-term. It asks, how can I make this dollar today become $2 tomorrow and $4 the next day? This is the miracle of compounding. The earlier you start, the more exponential your results. Jim loved to remind us that the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, and the second best time is today. The same is true of investments. Start now, even if it's small. Don't wait until you think you have enough. You'll never think you have enough. Start anyway. The act of investing changes your identity. You stop seeing yourself as just a worker and begin to see yourself as a builder, a creator, a steward of wealth. And here's the beautiful part. Once you become an investor, you start to see opportunities everywhere. Ideas, businesses, people, and ventures that you once overlooked now become possibilities. Your mind sharpens, your perspective widens, and you begin to think like the wealthy do. That is why the 10% investment rule is not just about money, it's about mindset. Jim warned, however, that investment requires patience. Don't join the easy crowd, he would say. If you want long-term rewards, you must be willing to wait. Quick riches are often quick losses. Investment is about planting in spring, tending in summer, and reaping in fall. It's about respecting the seasons, trusting the process, and resisting the temptation to dig up the seed because it hasn't sprouted fast enough. That patience is part of the discipline, and discipline always pays. The reward of the 10% investment philosophy is freedom. Imagine a life where your assets generate enough income to cover your expenses. Imagine waking up in the morning not because you have to, but because you want to. That's the promise of investment. It's not instant, but it is inevitable if you practice the discipline long enough. And the earlier you start, the faster you arrive. Jim's life was proof. He moved from wages to profits, from scarcity to abundance, because he learned not just to earn but to invest. And the invitation is the same for you. Every time you earn a dollar, set aside 10% for investments. Protect it, respect it, grow it. Don't rob your future by spending everything in the present. Let your money work as hard for you as you worked for it. That's how ordinary people build extraordinary fortunes, not by chance, not by luck, but by philosophy, discipline, and patience. And it all begins with the simple act of setting aside that sacred 10% and planting it in the fertile soil of opportunity. The 10% for giving and charity, Jim Rohn would often say, giving is better than receiving because giving starts the receiving process. That one line captures the essence of why he built the practice of generosity directly into his 70 divided by 10, divided by 10, divided by 10 formula. 10% of everything you earn should be set aside for giving, for charity, for causes you believe in, for people who need a hand, for building something bigger than yourself. At first, this may seem counterintuitive. After all, if you're trying to get ahead financially, why would you give money away? Shouldn't you hold on to every dollar? Jim's answer was simple. Wealth without generosity is empty, and the real measure of abundance is not how much you keep, but how much you share. He understood that money is more than numbers, it is energy, it flows, and when you stop the flow by clutching it tightly, you cut off the circulation of blessing in your life. By giving, you open a channel, and that channel allows both gratitude and opportunity to flow back to you. Jim used to remind his audiences that the practice of giving transforms you. It develops your character, it builds compassion, and it teaches you that true wealth is not measured only in possessions, but in the impact you make on others. When you give 10%, you prove to yourself that money doesn't own you, you own it. You declare that your financial plan is not just about survival or even prosperity, but about significance, and significance is what ultimately gives life meaning. Jim often told stories of wealthy people who had everything but were still miserable because they never learned to give. They built fortunes but lived in scarcity because they hoarded everything for themselves. On the other hand, he spoke of ordinary people who gave generously and lived with extraordinary joy, regardless of their income. The act of giving doesn't just change the receiver, it changes the giver, and that change is priceless. There is also a law at work here, one that Jim loved to talk about, the law of sowing and reaping. If you plant generously, you will reap generously. If you give kindness, you will receive kindness. If you give money to bless others, you set in motion a harvest that often comes back multiplied. Jim believed this was not mystical, but practical. Generosity builds networks, it builds goodwill, it builds trust. When you give, you expand your circle of influence. People remember generosity. Opportunities find their way to generous people. Doors open for those who have proven they care about more than just themselves. And that is why the 10% giving rule is not just charity, it is strategy. But Jim was quick to add, don't give for the purpose of getting. Give because it is right. Give because it is good. Give because it reflects abundance. The rewards will come, but they are the byproduct, not the motivation. The motivation is to live as a steward, not just a consumer. Giving also creates a profound sense of gratitude. When you give away part of your income, you are reminded of how blessed you already are. Gratitude shifts your focus from what you lack to what you have, and that shift alone creates a richer life. Jim said, learn to be thankful for what you already have while you pursue all that you want. Giving is an act of thankfulness in motion, and gratitude is magnetic, it attracts more to be grateful for. Practically speaking, giving 10% can take many forms. It might be supporting your church, funding education for underprivileged children, donating to a cause that matters to you, or simply helping a neighbor in need. The form is not the point, the heart island. What matters is that you discipline yourself to build generosity into your plan. Don't wait until you feel rich. Don't wait until someday, because someday never comes. Start now, even if it's small. If you earn $10, set aside one for giving. If you earn 100, give 10. The habit is far more valuable than the amount. Jim believed that generosity is a muscle. The more you practice it, the stronger it gets, and the easier it becomes to live a life of abundance. The 10% for giving is the part of the formula that transforms wealth into legacy. Anyone can accumulate, but not everyone contributes. Anyone can consume, but not everyone creates. By giving, you join the ranks of those who build, who lift, who leave the world better than they found it. And that, Jim would say, is the highest purpose of wealth. When you practice the 70 divided by 10 divided by 10 divided by 10 formula, the 10% for giving ensures that your financial journey is not just about success, but about significance. It ensures that your story is not just about what you got, but about what you gave. And in the end, that is the measure of a life well lived. Applying the 70 divided by 10 divided by 10 divided by 10 formula in today's world, the true power of Jim Rohn's 70 divided by 10 divided by 10 divided by 10 formula is not in the elegance of the numbers, but in its application to daily life. A philosophy, Jim would say, is only useful if you live it, and this formula is meant to be practiced, not admired. In a world filled with financial stress, rising costs, debt traps, and endless distractions, the ability to take control of your money with a simple, disciplined plan is more relevant today than ever. So, how do we apply it? The first step is to make the decision that your money will no longer control you, you will control it. That single choice changes everything. From there, the formula becomes your roadmap. When you receive your paycheck, the formula tells you what to do before emotion, impulse, or circumstance can hijack your decisions. Too many people spend first and save later, invest later, give later, and later never comes. Jim's wisdom flips that order. Save, invest, and give first, and then live on what remains. That order creates discipline, and discipline creates freedom. Let's take a closer look at how each part of the formula plays out in modern life. Living on 70% is the foundation. In a culture driven by consumerism, advertisements scream at you to buy the latest phone, the newest car, the trendiest clothes, always whispering that what you have is not enough. If you are not careful, you fall into the trap of measuring your worth by your possessions. But Jim taught that real worth comes from discipline and wisdom, not from gadgets or labels. Living on 70% forces you to make conscious choices. It demands you distinguish between needs and wants. It teaches you to enjoy life without drowning in debt. And here's the surprise. The restraint actually makes life richer because when you stop chasing every shiny object, you start appreciating what truly matters. People who practice the 70% rule find that their stress decreases, their relationships improve, and their opportunities expand, simply because they are no longer enslaved by overspending. The second step is the 10% for savings. In today's world, emergencies are not a matter of if but when. Cars break down, medical bills appear, jobs get cut, economies fluctuate. If you are unprepared, these moments can devastate your finances. But if you have practiced saving, you meet them with resilience. Jim often said, save a little, and it will surprise you how soon it becomes a lot. That's the miracle of discipline applied over time. A small portion set aside consistently becomes a fortress of security. Savings give you peace of mind, and peace of mind is priceless. It allows you to sleep at night knowing that you are prepared. The third step is the 10% for investment. Jim Rohn's voice still echoes. Wages make you a living, profits make you a fortune. Savings protect you, but investments grow you. In today's economy, opportunities for investment abound: stocks, businesses, real estate, digital ventures, intellectual property. But the principle remains the same. Take 10% of what you earn and put it to work. Don't consume it. Don't let it sit idle. Plant it like a seed and let it multiply. The key is not speculation but stewardship. Learn, study, understand, and then invest wisely. Jim reminded us that patience is essential. Investments grow over seasons, not overnight. But if you honor the law of sowing and reaping, the harvest will come. And when it does, it can create the kind of freedom wages never could. The fourth step, the 10% for giving, may be the most countercultural in today's self-centered world, yet it is also the most rewarding. Generosity transforms wealth into legacy. When you give, you prove that money doesn't own you, you own it. And you open channels of goodwill, gratitude, and opportunity that no amount of selfish accumulation could ever match. In a society where loneliness and disconnection are rampant, giving reconnects us to one another. It reminds us that life is about more than accumulation, it's about contribution. Jim used to say, giving is better than receiving because giving starts the receiving process. And in today's world, where so many chase happiness and come up empty, the act of giving brings joy, fulfillment, and meaning. So how does the average person begin applying this formula right now? Start small, start simple, start today. If your income feels too tight to divide, remember Jim's wisdom. If you cannot manage $1, you won't manage 1,000. The principle is not about the size of the amount, but the size of the discipline. Open a separate account for savings, another for investments, and even another for giving. Automate your transfers if possible, so the money is divided before you have a chance to spend it. Live intentionally on the 70%, even if it requires sacrifice. Cut out unnecessary subscriptions, cook more meals at home, resist impulse purchases. These small choices accumulate into large results. For students, it may mean saving from part-time jobs or investing in courses that increase skills. For employees, it may mean budgeting carefully and directing a portion of income into retirement accounts or stock portfolios. For entrepreneurs, it may mean reinvesting profits into business growth, while still maintaining the discipline of giving and saving. The formula is flexible enough to adapt to every season of life, yet rigid enough to demand accountability. And this is its genius. It forces you to master both sides of wealth, the science of managing numbers and the art of shaping character. Because in the end, money without discipline is chaos, but money with discipline becomes freedom. Jim Rohn's philosophy remains timeless because it addresses the core of human behavior. In a high-speed, digital, ever-changing economy, principles are more valuable than ever. Technology may change, but discipline does not. Markets may fluctuate, but generosity does not. Cultures may shift, but the laws of sowing and reaping do not. If you apply the 70 divided by 10 divided by 10 divided by 10 formula in today's world, you not only build financial security but also design a life of balance, purpose, and impact. You reduce anxiety, increase opportunity, and live with the quiet confidence that comes from order. And perhaps most importantly, you set an example for your children, for your peers, for your community, that money is not just to be spent, but to be stewarded, not just to be earned, but to be multiplied, not just to be kept, but to be shared. Jim's invitation is the same now as it was decades ago. Don't wait for perfect conditions. Don't wait for more income. Don't wait for someday. Start with what you have. Live on 70%. Save 10%. Invest 10%. Give 10%. Practice it diligently, consistently, faithfully, and watch how your life begins to transform. Because in the end, wealth is not a mystery, it is a discipline, and discipline always pays. A closing message of inspiration: Jim Rohn's 70 divided by 10 divided by 10 divided by 10 formula is not just a financial strategy, it is a philosophy for life, a declaration that discipline and intentionality are the foundation of true freedom. As we close this journey, let us remember that Jim himself began as an ordinary man, broke, frustrated, without direction. He was not born with wealth or privilege. What changed his life was not luck, but a decision to adopt a new philosophy and to live by it with consistency. That decision transformed a farm boy into a millionaire, a student into a teacher, and a man struggling with bills into a man whose wisdom would impact millions. And the same decision stands before you today. The beauty of the 70 divided by 10 divided by 10 divided by 10 formula is its simplicity. Live on 70% so you prove to yourself that you can master your desires. Save 10% so you secure your foundation against life's uncertainties. Invest 10% so you create a future where your money works harder than you do. Give 10% so you live with gratitude and leave a legacy that outlasts you. These numbers are more than percentages, they are disciplines, and disciplines shape destiny. Jim used to say, discipline is the bridge between goals and accomplishment. That bridge is not crossed in giant leaps, but in daily steps, choices made again and again until they form a habit, and habits form a life. And here is the truth. You don't have to be wealthy to begin, you only have to begin to become wealthy. If you earn $10, you can live this formula. If you earn 1,000, you can live this formula. What matters is not the size of the income, but the size of the commitment. Start small, stay consistent, and watch the compounding effect of discipline transform your financial story. More than money, though, this formula builds character. It teaches you to control yourself, to plan ahead, to think long-term, to care for others, and to live with balance. And that, Jim would remind us, is the true meaning of success, not just what you accumulate, but who you become in the process. Money comes and goes, but discipline, generosity, and wisdom are treasures that last. So as we close, I ask you, what will you do with this message? Will you let it inspire you for a moment and then fade? Or will you let it ignite a change that lasts a lifetime? Jim Rohn left us not only with words, but with an invitation to take responsibility, to adopt a philosophy, and to live a disciplined life. If you accept that invitation, you can move from scarcity to abundance, from stress to peace, from surviving to thriving. The 70 divided by 10 divided by 10 divided by 10 formula is not magic, it is not glamorous, but it is proven. And if you practice it, faithfully and consistently, you will one day look back and realize that your life, like Jim's, has been transformed not by luck, not by chance, but by choice. So don't wish it was easier. Wish you were better. Don't wait for tomorrow. Begin today. Take the first step, and then the next, and then the next, until discipline becomes habit, and habit becomes freedom. This is Jim Rohn's legacy, and it can be yours too.